Hilchis Mechirah Perek Shiva Aser. Arba Midas b'Meichrim. There are 4 dinim when you get Meichrim, when the Meicher says, describes a certain item, and it comes out to be not exactly the way the Meicher described. So there's different dinim of who can have charata. Now, Mocher lechitim yofis. The Meicher said that these chitim that he's selling are yofis. And lepel v'nimtzu rois, they weren't chitim yofis, they were rois. So lekeach yochel lazarbe, because he was expecting yofis, and he got rois. Aber v'lei ha-Meicher, the Meicher can't have charata, because the Meicher said he's giving chitim. He said he's giving chitim yofis, and he gave rois. So lepel, it's letevas ha-Meicher, not letevas ha-lekeach. So therefore, the Meicher can't have charata. Fakert rois v'nimtzu yofis. The Meicher said he's giving rois, and lepel it ended up being yofis. So the Meicher says, I made a mistake. I was selling you rois, and by accident I gave you yofis. So the din is ha-Meicher yochel lazarbe. The Meicher can have charata. He says, listen, I made up to sell you rois, and lepel I gave you by accident yofis. Aber v'lei ha-lekeach, the lekeach can't have charata. Now, rois v'nimtzu rois, or yofis v'nimtzu yofis, is aval pi she'ein yofis she'ein l'mayla mehen. It's not the very top yofis, and it's not the very worst rois. And lepel, the price that he gave was a sixth, either more or less of what it should have been. Is ein echad yochid memlachzebe elekono mazrino. So lepel, if he represented, he says, "I'm selling you yofis," and he sold him yofis. But lepel, it was overpriced, it was underpriced. Now there he told him he's selling rois, and he sold him rois. And it was underpriced or overpriced, so lepel, the sale is a valid sale, and lepel, the person that was nisana, could ask for a shtus back, is nachamol. So if he told him yofis, and lepel was rois, so the lekeach could have charata, not the mecher. If he told him rois, and lepel was yofis, so the mecher could have charata, and not the lekeach. If he said yofis, and it was yofis, and lepel, there was a einor, it was overpriced or underpriced, or he said rois, and it was rois, and it was lepel either overpriced or underpriced, so the sale is a valid sale, nobody could have charata, but on the other end, the one that was nisana could ask for the einor back. Halacha beis. Aval ha-mecher chitim shchamtis. He told him, I'm selling you like red chitim, dark chitim, and lepel it ended up being white, or fakert levon v'nimtzah shchamtis, or he told him, etzim shel zayis, I'm selling you wood, olive of an olive tree, and v'nimtzah shel shikma, I took it from a fig tree, or shel shikma v'nimtzah shel zayis. So notice it's mamish not the same thing that they made up that they're buying. He told him he's selling one thing, lepel I'm giving him another thing. Or yain, he says he's giving him wine, v'nimtzu chemes, and he ends up giving him vinegar, or chemes v'nimtzu yain. So here, kol echad mem yochaz el. Each one, they both could have charata. She'ein ze hamin she'amar she'im k'lei. When he says yofis and ends up being rois, so then only the lekeach can be chayz and the mecher, and only the lekeach can be chayz and not the mecher. Mashein over here, when he told him one and it ended up being the other, even if the other is better or worse than the first thing that he said, but lepel, since it's a completely different min, so therefore they could both have charata. It's not the min that he told him he's going to sell. Halacha gimel. Hamecher yain lechaveri unesone halikeach bikankanov vehechmetz miyad. In other words, the seller sold it in his kalim, and then the buyer went ahead and took it, the wine, from the kalim of the seller, and he put it into his own keli, and immediately it turned sour. Is any chayiv b'achrayusi, so the seller is not mechuyev b'achrayus. V'aval bisha amalei, the tavshel anitzorchli. The buyer told the seller that I need it for cooking. In other words, I'm not going to go drink it right away. I need it to last for a long time. But nevertheless, since lepel, he went ahead. And Vice says that wasn't the deal. The deal was, I'm giving to you my kalim, you could use it on my kalim. And he went ahead and poured it from the kalim of the mecher into the kalim of the lekeach. So the mecher kataina, that if it would have remained in my original kalim, it would have remained beseder. The reason why it went sour is because you poured it over into your kalim, and mele you are geirim this hezek, and therefore I'm not responsible. It says here v'im yoda, but it should say v'im yodua. That's how it's brought down Shulchan Aruch. V'im yodua sheyeni machmitz, that the seller's wine turned sour. So then it's ariza mekach tois. Then we don't assume that the reason why it was hichmitz is because it was poured over into the kalim of the lekeach. Then we assume that the reason why it was hichmitz is because we know that the kalim, that the wine of this seller is a wine that turns sour. And Memela, since he made up with him that he wants this wine, and he wants the wine for cooking, and Memela, it needs to last a long time, so the Mechir didn't really give him what they made up to give. That's the number one. Now, Mocher Liyayin Vareu B'Kankan of Shemeicher, he sold him wine and it still remained in the original kalim of the Mechir, and the hichmitz, and it turned sour. So that's it. Im Amr Le Mikvani Tzarech, if the buyer told the seller that I need this wine for cooking, and therefore I need it to last for a long time, and the hichmitz and lepela went sour, is mavzer. Ve'emole hariyencha v'kankanacha. Here's back your wine, and here's back your the kalim that the wine were in. Shanile konisi l'shteise levashel ma'at mi'at. Now you know I told you I'm buying it in order to cook, and therefore since it didn't last, so therefore this is not what I needed. So therefore it's a mekach tois. However, ve'imli amala mikvahu, if the buyer didn't tell the seller that the reason why I'm buying it is to use it for cooking, and mainly the pastor says he's buying it in order to drink, so then any houses, so then the buyer can't give it back to the seller. Shari Eimele, because the seller tells the buyer, Lamali Shasisei, in other words, I sold you wine, and you could have drank the wine. If you would have drank the wine, it wouldn't have turned into vinegar. The fact that you didn't drink it, so therefore that's why it turned into vinegar, is bekitzer. The seller sold the buyer the wine, and they didn't make up. So if he told him lemikvani tzarech, if he told him that the reason why he's buying it is in order to be able to last, because he wants to use it for cooking, so even though it remained in the original kalim, and lepela went sour, so the buyer tells the seller, listen, I bought it lemikvah. Masha'inkin, if the buyer didn't stipulate clearly that he's buying it lemikvah, so then the seller could tell the buyer, why didn't you drink it? And therefore the seller doesn't have to reimburse the buyer. He doesn't take it back and he doesn't reimburse him. That's the number one. Halacha dalet. Hamoicher chavish shel sheichel lechaveri. Person sells someone a barrel of vinegar, of beer, I'm sorry, not vinegar, beer. Hamoicher chavish shel sheichel lechaveri, he sells a barrel of beer. And v'chavish shel meicher, and the chavish belongs to the seller. V'hichmitza b'teich shleishi yom rishenim. It turns sour during the first 3 days, and it's already vinegar. So the din is arebus rishus hamecher, so it's considered rishus hamecher, and the buyer can give it back to the seller and get his money back. Umachzer sadam, and he has to give him back the money. If it turns sour after 3 days, so then it's rishus halekech, then it's considered rishus halekech. Nachamol, person sells someone a barrel of wine. If it turns into vinegar the first 3 days, it's in the barrel of wine that's still in the barrel of the seller. If it turns into vinegar the first 3 days, so then the seller is responsible, but after 3 days the buyer is responsible. And the reason is because once it turns into vinegar, we know that it doesn't turn into vinegar in 1 day. It takes 3 days lefachas for it to turn into vinegar. So if it turned into vinegar within the first 3 days, it means that when the seller sold it, it was already starting the process of turning into vinegar. So therefore, he sold him something that was becoming vinegar. Masha'inkin, if it happened after 3 days, so then we assume that it could have happened afterwards. So in other words, when he sold it to him, it was wine, and then he bought it, and then it started the process of changing into vinegar. So b'chiyai gavna, we say that that's the responsibility of the lekech. So this din over here we're saying is, again, that we're saying that since it happened after 3 days, it's the responsibility of the lekech. In the case before by the wine, even if it happened within the 3 days, and lepel, he didn't tell him lemikva nitzarech, it's also the obligation of the lekech, because it's brought down that by wine it could become vinegar even in less than 3 days. But again, sheikher, we assume that it doesn't become vinegar in less than 3 days. Mashenk in wine, it could become vinegar in less than 3 days. So therefore, in the previous case, if lepel, he bought wine and he didn't say clearly that he's buying it lemikva, and it turns into vinegar, so he could have tinus, then why didn't you drink it? But it has to be an amount of wine, and it depends how much wine he sold him. If you told him an amount of wine that it's not a regular thing for him to drink it so quickly, so then he could have tinus to him. Listen, I bought a taka to drink, but I can't drink so much wine. And memela, so then he could tina that it turned into vinegar. That's brought down in Shulchan Aruch. In other words, if he bought a certain amount of wine, which he could drink in 1 day, and memela, he could tina to him, listen, I sold it to you. The pashtus was to drink. You should have drank it right away. The first day, the second day, mashenkin. The fact that you waited and it became vinegar, so therefore I'm not responsible. Is nochmal. Benegea wine. If you told him clearly that he's going to hold it for cooking, so then the meicher is responsible. If you didn't tell him clearly, so then the meicher is not responsible, even if it happened within 3 days. Mashenkin benegea shecher. Benegea shecher. The rule is that if it happened within 3 days, so then the meicher is responsible. If it happened after 3 days, so then the lekech is responsible. Halacha hey, hamecher chavish shel yain lechavere, kedei lemochra ma'at ma'at. He sold it to him, and with the intent that this buyer is going to go ahead and sell it slowly. And he knows that this person is buying the wine to sell, and he's going to sell it a little bit at a time. He's not going to sell the whole barrel of wine. He's going to sell it. There's a big barrel of wine. He's going to sell it to individual people. So it's going to take a while until he sells it. And lepel v'hechmitza, it turned sour. It turned vinegar. B'machtzisa ebeshlisha. In other words, it was half full or a third full. Al kol pon, there's a lot left of the barrel. So the din is chizaris l'meicher. Then he goes back to the meicher. He says to the meicher, listen, I bought this barrel of wine, and it was clear that I'm buying the barrel of wine in order to sell it slowly. And lepel, before I got a chance to sell it, to sell the entire barrel of wine, to turn a half barrel of wine, now it turned into vinegar. So you didn't really give me wine for what I need, just like we said before. That when he said lemikva, so therefore he's responsible, because lepel, you know that I'm going to keep the wine for a while, and therefore it turned sour, turned into vinegar. So Memela, so you have to reimburse me. So Alderas over here, I bought a barrel of wine to sell slowly. Memela, since it turned sour before I sold it, so you have to reimburse me. That's talking about he didn't do anything to the barrel. The barrel is as is. However, if the buyer changed the place of the hole in the barrel, and it came the day of the shuk where really he could have been selling the wine and maybe even finished the wine. And lepel, this buyer went ahead and he didn't go ahead and sell it. So the din is then is harei b'shus halakeh, because the seller tells to the buyer, listen, I sold you the barrel of wine, and Amanazah, you should go ahead and sell it. Lepel, you could have sold it and you didn't sell it. So since you could have sold it and you didn't sell it, so lepel, now you're responsible if something turns wrong. V'chein hamekabel chavish shel yain mechaver. A person takes a barrel of wine from his friend. Kidei lehilicha lemakom pleinu lemacharsham. Now over here he didn't sell it. Over here the barrel of wine belongs to the original owner. He gave it to this person. That person they'll become like shutfim in the sense that he'll go ahead and sell the item for him, and they'll split the profits. They're going to split the profits. So he's like becoming responsible together. He's like half responsible for the wine. The wine is like kilo chatzi milva chatzi pikodin. Whereas the wine is now, both of them are going to be profiting from the wine. And lepeil, the kedem shegil sham, is either huzalayayin, the wine went down in value, or yechmitz, or it became vinegar. Is hareze b'shus hamecher, then it becomes all b'shus hamecher. In other words, had he not made up that they're going to a certain place, and lepeil, he would have been mekabel the wine, to go to sell it, so then they would split the profits and also split the losses. So in other words, any losses that would have been in this wine would have been split. But over here, since they made up, the one that gave the wine to the Mekabel, gave it to Almanas that he should bring it to a certain place. And Memela, so until he brings it to a certain place, he has no really rights to sell it. So Memela, the deal starts when they actually go to that certain place. And Memela, since before that, the price went down, or it became chaymes, so that's all the responsibility of the meicher. That's the word. He's mekabel this chavis of yain, and they're going to divide the profits. And the pastors, they'll also divide the losses. Before he reached that certain place, is huzel yain, the yain went down in value, or it became vinegar. So then it's areza b'shus hamechem. The barrel and the wine is his, and lepel, this person never had a right to sell it until they reached to a certain place. So memela, it's still his responsibility. V'chein kol kiyetz is any similar situation. Halacha vav. Ha'imul lechavere yayin mavusim ani meichelecha. I'm selling you yayin mavusim. Pashtus, he's selling it after. The time of pressing the grapes is after Sukkot, and sometime in the beginning of the winter, during the winter, he's telling him, Yayim avusam an mechelcha, I'm selling you good wine. Is chayiv lahamid le'adatzeres. He has to have wine that's going to last until Shavuos. Until Shavuos, the wine that he's selling to him during the winter should be lasting until Shavuos. After Shavuos, it's already hot, so therefore the wine could turn into vinegar. But lefachas, until Shavuos, it should last. Now, Amale Yain Yoshan Ani Mechelach, I'm selling you Yain Yoshan, which is a chshivus, is Nesli Mishal Shana Shavar. He has to give him the wine that was pressed the previous year. And this year, during the winter, he's selling him wine. So he's saying, I'm telling you Yain Yoshan. It has to be something that was pressed the previous year after Sukkot. If he's saying Mishushan, not Stam Yoshan, he's saying Miyushan. So then it has to be Mishal Sholashan. In other words, this should be the third year already. So not last year, but 2 years ago, the wine was pressed, and this is already the third year. And also, V'tzarek Shiyame, this wine that he's telling him that it's a Yain Miyushan, has to last, V'leyachmitz adachak, not until Atzeres, but he said, Yain Mavusim, it's enough that it should be until Shavuos. Now it has to be adachak until next Sukkot. B'mokim sheyesh minig yedua, this is the moment there's no minig yedua. B'mokim sheyesh minig yedua is hakel ki minig haMedina. Halacha Zayin. Ha'ema lechavere martiv zeh shel yayin ani mechirah lechol mikvah. Now, when a person says martiv zeh, that's like limiting his responsibility. He's saying this martiv. In other words, not I'm giving. If a person says martiv shel yayin ani mechirah lechol, so lechura he has to. A martiv is like a warehouse of yayin. So a person says martiv without the word zeh, so that's more of his chayvus. In other words, I have to provide you a martiv shel yayin. When a person says martiv zeh shel yayin, so that's being magbel as his chayvus, saying this martiv zeh shel yayin. But on the other hand, when he says lemikvah is also increasing his responsibility. It's his responsibility is that should be wine that lasts, because it should be lemikvah. Lemikvah means something that he's going to use for cooking, not for drinking. So martiv zeh shel yayin, on one hand, the lashon zeh is magbel the chiyuvim of the meicher, and on the other hand, the fact that it says lemikvah increases the chiyuvim of the meicher. Za'emel lechaveri martiv zeh shel yayin ani meichel chol mikvah. Oy shemochel martiv shel yayin stam. He didn't say the word lemikvah, but on the other hand, he didn't say martiv zeh. So when he says martiv zeh, so the word zeh is magbel and mikvah is marba. Masha'inka, when he just says martiv shel yayin stam, so martiv is lechura marba, but on the other hand, he didn't say lemikvah. So the din is harei halikeach mekabel olav asora kankan and b'chol meya shalei yenam toif. So when he uses this lashon, either martiv zeh shel yayin and nesin l'chol mikvah, or he just says martiv shel yayin without the word lemikvah, but on the other hand without the word zeh, so then we assume that the lekeach understands that 10 of those 10 kankanim of every 100, a tenth, will not necessarily be such good wine. It already started changing its taste. However, yesterday, when he uses such a lashon of martiv zeh shel yayin ani meichel lechol mikvah, or martiv shel yayin stam, so then yesterday leyakabel. This when he said this lashon. Now Amr lei martiv shel yayin ani meichel lechol mikvah, he didn't tell him the word zeh, but he said martiv shel yayin ani meichel lechol mikvah. So that's being marbed the responsibility of the leker. Of the mecher. Now, since the mecher is selling it lemikvah, that's a responsibility, and he didn't say the word zeh, so memela it means he has to provide him a wine lemikvah. And again, there was no hagbolas. Is nesele yayin shekuli yafa. So he has to give him good wine. He can't say that a tenth of the wine shouldn't be good. It has to be good wine. V'roy l'tavshel, and it's roy, that's something that can be used in order to put into cooking, which means should last a long time. Now, Amr le martiv zeh shel yayin, over here is fakert. In other words, martiv shel yayin, when a person says martiv shel yayin ani meisel l'chol mikvah, when a person says martiv shel yayin ani meisel l'chol mikvah, so it means it's complete as chayvus of the mecher. When a person says martiv zeh shel yayin ani meichel l'chol mikvah, so on one hand there's enhancing this chayvus of the mecher by saying lemikvah, but on the other hand diminishing it by saying martiv zeh. Now what happens when a person says martiv zeh shel yayin? He didn't say lemikvah, he just said martiv zeh shel yayin, which is minimalizing this chayvus of the mecher. So then is Nesan Yain and Nimker B'Chanus. You can give him wine that's sold in the Chanus. Shari Ubein, it's not a very good wine, necessarily very good. Leira v'le yofa. It doesn't have to be, it can't be bad wine, but it has to be, it doesn't have to be Yain Yofa. Now, Omer le martiv ze ani mechelecha, and v'le hisker Yain, so then it's fakert. I feel the kuli chemes he give, v'chein kol kietz b'zeh. When he just says martiv ze, I'm giving you this warehouse of whatever, he didn't tell him what it is. So then even if the entire was, even if it was completely chemes, it wasn't yain at all. It was completely vinegar. Is he gear because he didn't tell him that he's selling wine. Is again, when a person sells wine, the question is what the upmach is and how much you expect that it should be good wine or not good wine. So we spoke about that there's yain mavusim, that there's yain yoshon, that there's yain mayushon. That was different madregas of wine. Then we have when a person says martiv zeh shel yain, and the question is, did he add the word lemikvah or he didn't add the word lemikvah? So when a person says martiv shel yain, lemikvah without the word zeh, so that's only his chayvus, martiv shel yain lemikvah. So Mamela, he has to give him good wine. If he says martiv zeh shel yain without the word lemikvah, so then he could give him yain beinani. Then he could give mamish yain beinani. Masha'ein kain, if he says martiv shel yain lemikvah, which is only good, so then he has to give him dafka good wine. If he says martiv shel yain and mechel mikvah, so then he has to give him yain shekul yofis. That's the word. The word zeh is magbil his chayvus. The word lemikvah enhances his chayvus. So that's comes out the maskon of these prati adinim. Halacha tes. Ha'imul lechaveri areva shel eitz ani mechelecha. I'm selling you areva is like a keli, a kneading bowl that I'm selling you. Oi koiras beis habad ani mechelecha. Keli beis habad is a beam that they use to press olives. So I'm selling you either an areva, which is a kneading bowl, or a keres beis habad, a beam that they press olives. Is einen nasally eight shiroi lachber be'areva. He can't just give him a wood which is roi to make to dig out from it a kneading bowl. Oy kairo, you give him a big piece of wood shiroi lekeres beis habad, which is roi to make from it the beam of a beis habad. Ala areva b'tzurosa, you have to give him already an areva which was already made into an areva, not something which is potential to make an areva. It has to be an areva b'tzurosa. A keres beis habad b'tzurosam. Shekol arei emed, that anyone that looks at this base at this beam knows that zu areva, that this is an areva, this is a bowl. A zu keres beis habad, or this is a beam for a beis habad, for a place where they press olives. V'chein kol ki